So, Dr. Del Carmen, you're an expert. You teach this kind of things. I guess first, your thoughts on the gunfire.
Well, as soon as I heard it on the video, I knew that he had come from an automatic weapon. I mean, obviously the rapid fire, the speed in which he's actually doing it, and I'm sure that he pointed, although the evidence will confirm later on, that he pointed towards the center mass or the center movement of where most people were gathered so that he would actually maximize damage while minimizing the ammo expenditure.
Yeah, well, there are 22,000 people there, so he had a lot of targets.
How difficult is it? I mean, so he's shooting from the 32nd floor of a building across to me, it's amazing that they did this quickly, from out the window, although I guess you could probably see the broken windows. But in a situation like that, there's probably gunfire echoing. You got everybody and their mother seeing a gunman. I mean, what's it like being in law enforcement there and trying to figure out what is going on, and then how do you stop it?
Look, Las Vegas Police Department, especially the SWAT team, did an incredible job, nothing short of a miracle, as to how quickly they responded to the scene. Imagine this happening all at the same time, and 20,000 people calling 911 or potentially calling 911, people inside the hotel listening to gunfire calling 911, and those 911 dispatchers trying to piece it all together and send that information to law enforcement, while law enforcement trying to respond to the scene. All of that is happening at the same time while the bad guy is still killing people. And so it's very, very difficult, in spite of the thousands of hours that officers train and retrain for this, to at that point have to assess the situation, do a situational awareness test, figure out exactly where the shooter's coming from, figure out where the bad guy is, and then take him out. So it's very hard.
And they're getting false information, not deliberately false, but inaccurate information. Better one, multiple shooters, and which often happens because people can't tell where the gunfire is coming from.
Well, and you don't know if they're you don't know if it's an ambush. I mean, this is one thing, that I always remember. I'm a TV reporter, a former TV reporter, and I've covered many criminal situations. And, you got 22,000 people running away, and then you have the police running to where the shots are being fired.
That's exactly right. And then also keep in mind, too, that for any officer that responds to the scene, first thing that comes to mind is this could be terrorism. They could booby trap that room. It could be multiple individuals shooting all at the same time. This may be stage 1 of stage 3 attacks on Las Vegas. And so all of that is going on at the same time. And now, of course, Monday morning quarterbacking, we know the story, we know what happened, but it's very difficult to be at that moment in that instance and trying to assess it and control it.
Let me ask you this. When we heard the SWAT guys and we heard them doing the breach, now I've covered situations before where they have time to kind of drill through a wall or put some kind of device in there, listening one way or another to try to determine if somebody's in the room, or they maybe can try to, contact the person. Would that have been done in a situation like this?
Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, it sounded to me like they just knew they had to move fast, and they weren't even sure he was still in the room.
Yeah, because what they know is that they know that people are dying, right? So if they go out there and start negotiating or putting a camera through and all of that, that may take out lives, more lives than the lives that it took out. I always say, look, as tragic as it is to have had 50-plus people dead and over 400 people injured, there would have been potentially a lot more bodies on the ground this morning had it not been for the rapid response of law enforcement.
Yeah.
How do they, so from that, there's numerous phases. Like you said, there's all this going on. They're trying to coordinate. We saw here in the Aurora Theater shooting, it was it was even smaller, hard as that is to imagine than this, but it was exactly that. You had everybody and their mother was calling 911. You got reports all over the place of shooters. They don't know what they have going into it. You've got law enforcement responding. You've got paramedics responding. Everybody's responding while they're trying to figure out what's going on. So they stop the guy, and now they start investigating. How do you investigate such a massive, chaotic scene?
Look, it's a massive operation, but the good news is that the FBI is the lead entity here, which means they've done this before and they do it incredibly well. They have to have discipline, they have to be incredibly meticulous, and they have to go stage by stage of not only securing the physical crime scene, which, by the way, is very hard to do so when the crime scene is outdoors, right? Because of all the elements of the weather and various other things. And so if you have something indoors, it's a lot easier to control, what goes in and out. But in an outdoor environment, I'm sure they roped it off. They had to walk through it. They had to be able to identify the bodies, be able to identify where the shots came from, how fast the shots were fired, and the timing of it all. Plus, we have, I'm sure, a lot of video footage that they're going through right now to try to repiece it together. So it will take a while before they.
Let me play a bit of the FBI statement.
As this event unfolds, we have determined to this point no connection with an international terrorist group.
I thought that was a strange statement. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's possible connection to international.
I mean, that was made this
groups.
morning, and ISIS is claiming how. Yeah, let me ask you about that. Can they really tell that quickly? And what's your sense of this? We have ISIS keeps repeating and sort of quadrupling at this point down now that this guy had been recently radicalized. We haven't heard any more recent statements from the FBI, but how do they sort that out?
Well, they're able to get preliminary information, and sometimes they're able to, tell the public so that they can have a different perspective on the story as to what happens, But history has taught us that sometimes many of these investigations, they evolve, right? They evolve as more and more evidence is found, more and more people are talked to. I mean, I imagine that when they go through this guy's computer, cell phone records, trips overseas, economic transactions that were made, and various other things, they're going to be able to put the entire picture together. But, people demand answers. We live in a real-time society where people want to know right away, and they don't realize that instead of that 1-hour episode of CSI that they watch, in real life, it takes months to be able to have the full story and to be able to write or say what exactly happened here.
His brother has just reported that the shooter was a multimillionaire due to real estate investments, which allowed him to gamble a lot. Boy, that isn't the normal lone wolf shooter, I have to say.
Well, part of the problem is that we have a lot of new normals now, right? So a lot of times when we actually go back and try to figure out history in the past 40 years in terms of crime in the United States, I mean, every other day it seems like we're rewriting that story.
So just in general, your thoughts on this and your take on what's happening and what's going to happen?
Well, in terms of the investigation, I think it's going to be weeks, perhaps even months before we actually know what happened, right? In terms of our vulnerability, this is a reminder, as I have been saying now for years, that, America, the United States, we are vulnerable, and we need to start thinking and rethinking how we live our lives and whether or not we are willing to compromise some of the conveniences of going to these events without the security that perhaps they entail, because we live in a different society now, right? And so I think there's a lot of different angles to the story, many conversations that we hope to make after the emotional aspect of it dies down, and we're able to zero in on exactly what are the lessons learned here.
Well, you raise a good point, because I know I covered Columbine, and after Columbine, that had a huge impact on how law enforcement responds to active shooter situations. And you always see these changes with law enforcement, but you're right, you don't often see necessarily big changes society-wise. And I know,
but there were huge ones, both good and bad. I mean, we also had the result that zero tolerance, which result in 8-year-olds drawing stick figures being thrown into squad cars. I mean, there's reaction and there's overreaction.
Right, and I think sometimes what we do as a society is we react to things emotionally, right, when the things are happening. But both of you know, being in the medium in which you are, that in a week from now we're going to be talking about something else, right? And this is going to be a segment of a long segment of news. And so at the end of the day, what actually matters is for the rest of us that do this for a living and are trained police officers every day is to be able to go back and figure out exactly what happened and ask the tough questions. Is there any way that we could have prevented this? Could we have done things better? But look, on events like these, those individuals that are profiting from those events, not only the actors and actresses, singers, and individuals that are performing, the folks that are actually supporting these events have a moral, ethical, and legal, perhaps, obligation sometimes to be able to secure the people that are there. And although one could argue that it's very difficult to have secured the entire hotel, at the end of the day, these are the lessons that we're going to have to learn and figure out how can we keep people safe all the time, or most of the time.
We're talking with Dr. Alex Del Carmen, a law enforcement training and tactics expert. Yeah, one thing that occurred to me is that, and I don't know, maybe this would be prohibitively expensive, but I know, like, in my house, if we have an alarm system, and if a window breaks, an alarm goes off. And it seemed like that would have been helpful if you had, if he broke the windows, obviously, to shut out.
But, sometimes there's not a solution to everything. We have a concert venue called Fiddler's Green, and it's surrounded by lots of office buildings. I mean, enormous office buildings, all within the reach. I don't think you could secure all of them for every concert. It'd just be draconian.
No, but go ahead, sir.
No, that's exactly right. And I think when you look at it from the standpoint of the best security in the world is afforded to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, right? But yeah, we've had how many presidents die, unfortunately, while they're presidents?
Good
so
point.
At the end of the day, you can secure people all that you want. You can rehearse. You can send out snipers. You can send out helicopters. You can do all of that. And unfortunately, there will be that one time that the bad guys are going to get it right, and they're going to inflict massive damage to the American people. So to your point, you're exactly right. We can never secure and ensure the safety of most Americans all the time, but we can certainly try to do things a little differently because we are dealing with a different mindset of criminal today, whether terrorist or not. At the end of the day, they are using things that are rather basic, and they are attacking us in places that most of us would not have expected to be attacked.
Do you think that people, I know law enforcement gets that, and I imagine if you're a police officer or in law enforcement, you just might be every day like totally paranoid, freaking out. I mean, it's hard to not be when you realize all the things that could go wrong. Do you think that people, the average person going about their day, I mean, for instance, I was listening to interviews, right, and many of the survivors here were saying, I never dreamed this could happen to me. Do you think that because I mean
I hope they never, because if you're going around every time you go to a concert or doing any normal task and you're sitting there, well, maybe I'll be butchered today, that's not a good thing. I mean, I think you do have to go around. I mean, you may have a heart attack like Tom Petty, you may have 1,000 things, but you do have to lead your life, and you do have to take reasonable precautions. But God promises tomorrow to no one.
Right, and I think that as a great American society that we are, we refuse, as we should, to live on fear all the time. But at the same time, just because we refuse to live in fear, it doesn't mean that we are going to simply let our guard down and not be situationally aware. So there are going to be a lot of questions being asked about how this man was able to bring in weapons of that magnitude inside his hotel room. There's going to be questions as to his background and whether or not this is something we could have been able to tell. All I know is that as a criminologist, someone that has trained law enforcement for 20 years, is that looking back at this video and looking back at what we know today, the kudos should go to the law enforcement professionals, which at the end of the day, although many people have been attacking them for the past few years, at the end of the day, these are the folks that are going into the mouth of the lion, so to speak, when everybody else is trying to get out. They're the ones that identify it, neutralize the threat, and we're able to potentially save a lot of lives. So there are a lot of heroes from yesterday's tragedy and people alike that were running and covering. I heard a story of a mother that actually jumped over her baby to try to protect the baby from being killed. I mean, there are a lot of stories of that. When this is happening all at the same time, rapid fire, people are screaming, a lot of folks don't really know what's going on, and it's amazing how some people reacted to that. So there are a lot of good stories out there in the midst of this tragedy.
But I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, because I disagree with Chuck a little bit. We're talking with Dr. Alex Del Carmen, a law enforcement training and tactical expert. I know my daughter this summer was touring, and I won't go into all the reasons why, but with U2, the band U2. And when they got to Charlottesville, no, wherever they St. Louis, there were riots, right? And the band made the decision. The city said, "Hey, we can't guarantee we can have all the cops there for you, because if something blows up here, we're going to have to pull them." And so they canceled the concert. And now I think, like you, it can't be totally up to them. But you got to wonder, because we know this could happen, you would think that the venue and the band or something, because when you can see in the videotape, everybody just runs, right? There's no one there giving direction to people. Now, granted, everybody's lives are at stake.
How could you possibly have people giving direction? No one of the people were thinking, hey,
I'm asking Alex, Dr. Del Carmen.
I mean,
do you think, though, is there something, and I'm not criticizing anybody for that, because God knows it must have been terrifying, but is that the kind of thing you're talking about, where maybe we can, at least at some point, you can't solve everything and prevent everything, but there are certain things you can look at and say, maybe we could have done this, or we could have tried this?
Well, maybe. I mean, but okay. At the end of the day, what you look at when you see the video, pay attention to the fact that there are people that are actually even walking around with their beer, and standing over those individuals that are squatting.
That don't get it.
That goes to show you that there are individuals there were individuals in that venue that this is Vegas. And this is a concert, right? And this
Right.
is happening all at the same time. So there are people out there that are walking around thinking, why are y'all so alarmed?
Right.
This is just, somebody is throwing firecrackers or perhaps somebody is just having fun with something else. So my point is that people react to things differently. I think the better way of looking at this is not only from the lessons learned perspective, but we as a society have to decide what type of a life we're going to live, right? So at the end of the day, you look at the Israelis and the type of security that they have for its citizens because they live with a constant threat of terrorism. And we in the United States have been somewhat spoiled for the past 200 plus years that we haven't faced the level of terror that other countries have faced. And now we're beginning to see a face that threatens the American fiber of how we live our lives. And we have to ask ourselves the question, are we willing to sacrifice some of our commodities, some of the things that we don't like to do, i.e. make a long line at a train station for the sake of security, or be able to pay a little bit more for a ticket because you've got, a stricter security at an event? Are we willing to do that as a society for the sake of feeling a little safer when we go to these events?
Yeah,
That's
I
really
hope
the
not.
question.
I hope we
Right.
don't get
Well,
down
let me
to
ask
that,
you.
but-
Let me ask you one more question before we let you go, because I still want to go back to. I agree with you. I think it is a miracle, that the police and the first responders that were able to do that. Can you just sort of talk one more time about how chaotic it is and how, to me, it's just so impressive that they were able to. I mean, what are you going to count up the fours? 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, that they were able to so quickly figure out what was going on, where this guy was, and to take the threat out.
Right. So I call the law enforcement profession my own label that I've given them 100 hours to boredom, 1 second of terror. And this is the 1 second of terror that they prepare for and they train for. So what's going on all at the same time is, imagine these law enforcement officers that respond to the scene. They're watching all these people run in different directions, people on the ground bleeding and some dead. And then they're looking as to where the fire's coming from, and they quickly identify that there is a floor, there is a window where there's smoke coming out of it, and potentially that's where the bad guy is. So they have to then communicate with people that are inside the hotel, going up the elevator to try to figure out which room it is. All of this is happening at the same time while there are, when that officer gets out of that elevator, he or she sees probably 15 rooms lined up left or right and does not know which is the room where the fire is coming from. So it is nothing short of a miracle and good training, all of that put together, that has allowed for them to respond the way they did.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your work. Appreciate it
very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.